The baby's too loud. I need a break. Crowley Ashford said it while rolling a suitcase past me, our 12-day-old daughter screaming against my chest. Now, let me back up. It was 4:40 on a Monday morning in July. We lived in a stone and cedar house in Stone Oak, on the north side of San Antonio, the kind of neighborhood where sprinklers came on before sunrise and neighbors waved from their trucks. I bought that house 2 years before I met Crowley, with the money my mother, Eleanor, left me and the savings I'd built over 9 years in Air Force logistics. The deed had one name on it. Mine. I stood barefoot near the front door in an old Air Force t-shirt, one hand supporting Odessa's head, the other pressed against my C-section incision. Crowley looked like a travel advertisement. Linen shirt, white sneakers, sunglasses hanging off his collar. I looked like I hadn't slept since Memorial Day. "Please," I said. "Just push it back 1 week." He checked his phone instead of my face. "The flights are non-refundable. You booked this trip 6 days ago." He sighed like I was being unreasonable. Odessa's crying climbed another notch, sharp and breathless, and he winced at it. "You've handled deployments," he said. "Don't tell me one baby is more than you can manage." That was how Crowley used my military career against me. Whenever he wanted to brag about me at a dinner party, I was his tough Air Force wife. Whenever he wanted to avoid responsibility, I was suddenly too capable to need help. He leaned down and pressed 2 fingers to Odessa's forehead. He'd made that same gesture to me once, years earlier, before I boarded a transport overseas. Back then it felt private and loving. That morning it felt like something he did for a camera that wasn't there. His rideshare pulled away at 4:47. I stayed at the door until the taillights disappeared. Then Odessa spit warm formula down the front of my shirt. The first few days blurred together. Odessa had reflux and seemed most uncomfortable between midnight and 4 in the morning. I would feed her, hold her upright, change her, settle her into the bassinet. 10 minutes later, the crying would start again. My incision burned whenever I stood too fast. My ankles were swollen. I kept forgetting whether I'd taken my pain medication. One night, after she finally fell asleep, I went into the bathroom and locked the door. I sat on the closed toilet lid, held a folded towel against my stomach, and cried as quietly as I could. I thought about calling Crowley. Then my phone lit up with a video from his friend Alistair Kane. Crowley on a speedboat, laughing into the wind, someone popping champagne behind him. I turned the phone face down. 3 days later, I drove to a pharmacy on Loop 1604, because we were out of formula and infant gas drops. Odessa started fussing before I reached the register. The cashier scanned everything. "Our joint debit card was declined." "Still not going through," she said gently. A man behind me shifted his basket. Sweat gathered under my shirt. My incision tightened until I had to lean against the counter. "I have another card." My hands shook while I dug out the emergency credit card in my wallet. In the car, I checked our bank account. Nearly $18,000 had moved out of our savings. I called Crowley twice. He didn't answer. For hours later, he texted that the resort needed a bigger deposit, that he'd replace it once a deal closed, that I shouldn't turn everything into a crisis. I read it 3 times. Then I called my father. Magnus Doyle arrived from New Braunfels that evening carrying diapers, groceries, and an old canvas kit bag. He was 72 and moved slower than he admitted. His hip bothered him on the front steps, but when I asked, he waved me off. "Just needs oil," he said. He took Odessa while I showered. When I came back, he was in the nursery recliner, struggling with the tiny snaps on her sleeper, his fingers stiff from arthritis. After the 3rd failed attempt, he looked up. "You're going to have to handle the fine motor portion of this operation." It was the first time I'd laughed since Crowley left. Later that night, I found him asleep in that chair, Odessa resting on his chest, one hand pressed against his own hip. He was hurting. He'd come anyway. That was also the night my father gave me something else. A brass field compass, dented on one corner. The glass scratched but true. The same one my grandfather had given him decades earlier. A man who knows which way is north never has to trust anybody else's directions, he said, and pushed it across the counter to me. I put it in the drawer by the door, and didn't think much of it. Not yet. I want to tell you about the version of Crowley I actually married, because it matters for what comes later. 3 years before Odessa was born, my father had knee surgery, and Crowley sat beside his hospital bed for 6 hours making terrible jokes until he laughed through the pain. The year after that, Crowley drove 14 hours straight to surprise me at my promotion ceremony. People don't usually turn into someone else overnight. Sometimes they just make one selfish choice after another until the choices are all that's left of them. I opened our joint email account that Saturday morning looking for the pediatrician's billing portal. That was not what I found. There was a thread between Crowley and a mortgage broker, dated 6 weeks back, before he'd even left for the Maldives. He had started refinancing our house. My house. The refinance couldn't move without my signature. He had written that I'd already agreed to it. I stared at the screen until the words stopped blurring. This was no longer about a selfish vacation. My husband was trying to take control of my largest asset while I recovered from surgery and raised our daughter alone. I didn't call him. I saved every email, built a folder, and left a message for Flannery Whitaker, a family law attorney recommended by someone at the base. A few minutes later, another video came through from Crowley, this one on a yacht. "Look at me," he said into the camera. "I finally feel alive again." I looked across the room at my father, holding my daughter, his hearing aid giving a faint whistle every time he turned his head. Crowley hadn't left because he needed rest. He'd left because he believed I would keep carrying whatever he dropped. The first time I met Flannery, Odessa slept through nearly the whole appointment. Flannery looked to be in her early 50s, calm in a way that reminded me of officers who'd seen enough chaos to stop reacting to it. "Start wherever you need to," she said. I told her everything. The vacation. The missing money. The refinance emails. When I finished, she folded her hands. "The good news is he can't refinance a house that's legally yours without your signature." I finally let out the breath I'd been holding. "The bad news is you need to be careful not to let your anger create problems for you. Don't change the locks yet. Don't empty every joint account. Don't threaten him over text. Let the paperwork protect you instead of your emotions." Let the paperwork protect you. 9 years of logistics had taught me something close to the same lesson. Procedures exist because emotions are unreliable under pressure. Over the next week, I built a file. Not for revenge. For facts. Logistics work had trained me to notice patterns. Missing equipment, incorrect invoices, supplies that disappeared one box at a time instead of all at once. Money wasn't much different. I made a spreadsheet. Dates, transfers, account numbers, emails, screenshots, a note beside every line. One afternoon I found something that hurt worse than the missing savings. Crowley had listed my military employment and projected retirement benefits on an application for a business line of credit. He hadn't forged my signature. He'd just written my future into his paperwork like it already belonged to him. That hurt more than I expected. Not because of the money, but because I understood he'd stopped seeing me as a partner. I'd become an asset on his balance sheet. 2 days later, my phone rang. Waves in the background. "Darling," Crowley said, relaxed. "Quick favor. The guys found this private charter, it'll help with networking. I need 6,000. Temporary." "No." Silence. "You didn't even think about it." "I did." "You don't trust me anymore?" The question caught me off guard. For one dangerous moment, I remembered a different Crowley. The one who drove 14 hours for my ceremony. The one who sat beside my father's hospital bed. People don't usually become someone else overnight. Sometimes they just make one selfish decision after another, until eventually that's all that's left. "I'll pay everything back," he said. "I know. You know? I know that's what you'll keep saying." I hung up before he could answer. My father had heard enough from the living room. He set a mug of coffee down beside me. "If you sent that money," he asked quietly, What exactly would you be buying? Hope. Guilt. One more excuse. None of it was worth $6,000. I closed the banking app. 3 days later, Crowley's mother arrived. Bramwyn Ashford stepped out of her sedan with a floral cane and enough determination to convince anyone she didn't need it. The cane's just for uneven sidewalks, she announced before anyone asked. My father muttered something. She heard it perfectly. For your information, my hearing works fine. He smiled. Mine doesn't. She defended her son on instinct at first. He shouldn't have stayed away this long, she admitted. But becoming a father scares some men. He emptied our savings. Married people share money. He's trying to refinance my house. She didn't have an answer for that. Her phone rang instead. Her credit card company. 5 minutes later she sat at my dining table looking like the floor had dropped out beneath her. International charges. Resort charges she never made. We logged into her accounts together and found withdrawals from her retirement savings too, small enough each month to avoid attention. She found a message on an old tablet still syncing with Crowley's phone. A conversation with Alistair, saying his mother had signed everything, that she didn't really keep track of her accounts anymore. She read it once, then again. She wasn't angry at first. She looked embarrassed, then heartbroken. I taught him better than this, she said. I reached across the table and squeezed her hand. For the first time since she'd arrived, she didn't pull away. That evening she admitted she'd fallen twice in the past year and hadn't told anyone, afraid people would decide she couldn't live alone anymore. My father said only, needing help doesn't mean giving up your life. Says the man who refuses a walker, she said. Takes one stubborn person to recognize another. Someone laughed for the first time all week. Then my phone buzzed. Crowley planning a welcome home barbecue. Invite the neighbors. Alistair and Tobin Marsh were coming. Orson Bellamy might stop by. I stared at the name. Orson Bellamy wasn't a friend. He was one of the biggest private real estate investors in San Antonio. I understood immediately. The barbecue wasn't about coming home. It was another deal. And somehow my house was part of it. I barely slept that night. The next morning I drove to Flannery's office. I looked into Orson Bellamy, she said before I even sat down. So did I. He's been describing your property as an off-market opportunity. He thinks he can sell my house? I think he believes you'll stay quiet. That hurt because it was probably true. For years I'd protected Crowley from embarrassment. Keeping the peace had become another full-time job. Not anymore. I don't want a circus, I told her. I want everyone who's been lied to hear the truth. That's a much stronger position. We built the plan. If Crowley claimed authority over the house in front of Orson, I'd calmly ask him to produce written permission. When he couldn't, I'd present the deed and Flannery's letter. Only then, if the judge signed in time, would the process server hand him the papers. No shouting. No scene. Fax would do the work. At home, my friend Merritt Alvarez was unloading groceries. Figured you'd forget to eat again, she said, handing me a sandwich before I could argue. So what's the battle plan? It's not a battle. Fine. What's the operation? I laughed despite myself. We're catering the party. I don't have the energy, and I'm done pretending everything's perfect. I ordered barbecue from a family-owned place in New Braunfels my father loved. Merritt grinned at the confirmation. You know what I like about you? You'll destroy someone's entire fantasy and still make sure they get decent barbecue first. But real life doesn't pause for anything important. Odessa's reflux got worse. One night she cried for nearly 3 hours straight. By dawn my incision felt like fishing line pulling beneath the skin every time I stood. I ignored it until I picked up a laundry basket, and pain shot across my stomach so fast I nearly dropped everything. Merritt drove me to urgent care while my father stayed with Odessa. The doctor frowned at the incision. You've been doing too much. I don't really have a choice. You always have choices. Easy to say. Harder to live. On the drive home I stared out the window. What if I cancel all of this? I asked quietly. What do you mean? The party. The confrontation. Everything. I'm tired. Not angry. Not determined. Just tired. I know. Merritt glanced at me. If revenge was your goal, you'd have changed the locks the day he left. You've spent a month protecting yourself, your daughter, your father, even his mother. Don't confuse boundaries with revenge. Those words stayed with me. 2 days later, Flannery called. The judge hadn't signed the temporary possession order yet. My stomach dropped. So he can still come into the house? If it isn't signed before he's back, yes. We talked through alternatives. I hated the uncertainty, but it reminded me this wasn't a movie. Real life doesn't run on a schedule. Meanwhile, my father and Branwen had become something unexpected. She brought a peach cobbler one afternoon. He complained it had too much cinnamon. She told him his taste buds had retired before he did. They sat on the back porch drinking sweet tea while Odessa slept inside. After a long silence, my father admitted his doctor wanted him to have hip replacement surgery. I've been putting it off. I don't want Callista taking care of me on top of everything else. Branwen looked at her cane. I understand. She admitted she avoided baths now, afraid she couldn't get back up. Neither of them wanted sympathy. They wanted dignity. Watching them, I understood something. Growing older wasn't about pretending you didn't need help. It was about deciding who had earned the right to give it. The night before Crowley came home, I sat beside Odessa's bassinet and recorded a voice memo. If you ever listen to this someday, I hope you know your father leaving wasn't why our marriage ended. People make terrible decisions and still find their way back. What ended us was that he kept choosing himself, every time he was given another chance not to. The next morning, Flannery called. The judge had signed everything. We're ready. We're ready. An hour later, Crowley called from the airport, Alistair and Tobin laughing behind him. Everything ready for tonight? I looked around the quiet house. My father asleep with an ice pack on his hip. Odessa finally resting. The legal folder sitting on the dining table. Almost, I said. Then I hung up. Tomorrow, Crowley would walk through that front door believing he still controlled our future. He had no idea it had already changed. The barbecue started at 4 o'clock on a Saturday afternoon. Texas heat settled over the backyard like a blanket, but a steady breeze carried the smell of smoked brisket down the block. Everything looked exactly the way Crowley wanted it to look. Nothing suggested that by sunset his entire life would be different. My father sat in the shade, pretending his hip wasn't bothering him. Branwen arrived 20 minutes early with a peach pie nobody had asked for. I know we already have dessert, she said. But this one has more butter. I'll be the judge of that. You'll judge anything. For the first time in weeks, my heart wasn't racing. It was steady. At exactly 4:37, a black SUV stopped out front. Alistair climbed out first, then Tobin. Then Crowley stepped onto the driveway in an expensive polo and sunglasses, wearing the relaxed smile of a man convinced everything was exactly where he'd left it. He opened his arms. I'm home. No one rushed toward him. Merritt got to the door first. Shoes off. The baby's sleeping. He laughed. You've turned this place into boot camp. He walked in carrying souvenirs, handed Alistair a beer before he'd said a word to his own daughter. Odessa mattered less than the entrance. When he found me in the kitchen, he kissed my cheek for the benefit of anyone watching. You look exhausted. I've had a busy month. I knew you'd handle everything. Of course he did. Handling everything had become my whole reputation. Then Orson Bellamy walked through the gate, and Crowley lit up like a switch had flipped. Within minutes he was giving Orson a tour of the house. I stayed outside and waited. Truth lands harder when people hear the lie first. A few minutes later I walked into the living room with Odessa on my hip. Crowley stood by the fireplace, pointing at a wall. This could come out. Open concept sells. And Callista trusts me with all the property decisions. I let one more second pass. Crowley? Would you mind showing Orson the document where I gave you permission to sell my house? Silence. Real silence. The kind where everyone becomes very interested in the same conversation. Crowley laughed it off. Callista's joking. I looked at Orson. I'm not. We've talked about selling. We've talked about a lot of things. Where's my authorization? He looked uncomfortable for the first time all afternoon. Callista just, there isn't one. Because we're married. So the answer is no. He stepped closer, voice low. Can we not do this in front of everyone? You're tired. You're emotional. Let's not make a scene. I'd expected that. Not anger. Not denial. Just enough doubt to make everyone question me instead of him. I handed Orson the folder Flannery had prepared. This is the certified property record from Behar County. The home was purchased before our marriage, with my inheritance and my military savings. The deed has always been solely in my name. Orson read it, then looked at Crowley. You told me this was jointly controlled. It basically is. No, I said gently. It isn't. His brokerage manager stepped closer. Crowley, did you know this? He straightened his shoulders. I was acting in the family's best interest. I invested our money. I was building something bigger. You took our emergency savings while your newborn needed formula. I was going to replace it. After using my employment records for a business credit application? You checked that. I checked everything. My turn. Branwen walked slowly into the room, her cane tapping across the hardwood. You also used my retirement account. Mom, you charged your vacation to my credit card. I was managing your finances. You were hiding from me. Her shoulders straightened. My age made me slower, Crowley. It did not make me stupid. I trusted you because you're my son. And you treated that trust like a blank check. My father pushed himself up, his hip clearly hurting. He didn't care. The women in your life believed in you. You confused that with ownership. The doorbell rang. A man in a gray suit stood outside with a leather folder. Crowley Ashford, you've been served. He took the envelope automatically. Divorce petition. Temporary financial restrictions. Custody filing. A court order granting me exclusive possession of the home. His expression changed so fast it looked painful. He glanced toward the garage keypad. The code had already been changed. He looked back at me. No, he whispered. This can't be happening. It already happened. You were just on vacation. Nobody applauded. Nobody cheered. Real life doesn't work that way. Alistair quietly picked up his overnight bag. Tobin leaned toward Merritt. Know any decent hotels nearby? Sure, she said. But you're paying for your own room. I walked to the hall closet and came back with a small duffel bag. His clothes, his medication, his charger. You're throwing me out? I'm giving you what you'll need tonight. You planned all this. No. You planned it. You just expected me to keep cleaning up after you. He looked at Odessa, asleep against my shoulder. For 1 second I saw something I'd almost forgotten. Regret. Maybe it was real. Maybe it wasn't. Either way, it came too late. As he walked toward the door, Branwen sat beside my father, who was struggling to twist open a water bottle. Without a word, she took it, opened it, and handed it back. Neither of them said thank you. They didn't need to. I looked around my home. For the first time in a very long time, it finally felt safe. People ask what happened to Crowley after that afternoon. They expect a dramatic ending. Life almost never works that way. The truth is quieter, and far more satisfying. Over the following months, his world got smaller. His brokerage suspended him while they investigated how he'd represented properties to investors. Orson withdrew from every deal with his name attached, and word moved fast through San Antonio's real estate circle. Nobody wanted to work with someone whose version of ownership depended on who was asking. The divorce moved through the courts slowly, methodically. The bank records mattered. The emails mattered. The deed mattered. I got primary custody of Odessa. Crowley got structured visitation, and in order to repay a significant portion of what he'd taken. Oddly enough, once everything settled, that's when I finally started falling apart. The adrenaline ran out. The lawyers stopped calling as often. My father went home. My body finally realized the emergency was over. One afternoon I sat in my car outside the grocery store and couldn't make myself go in. My hands were shaking. I wasn't afraid of Crowley anymore. I was just exhausted. My doctor diagnosed postpartum anxiety and referred me to a counselor through a military family support program. In my first appointment I laid it all out like a logistics briefing. The counselor listened, then asked one question. What happened to Callista? I frowned. What do you mean? You've told me what happened to your marriage. You haven't told me what happened to you. I opened my mouth. Nothing came out. Being independent doesn't mean pretending you're 25. My father laughed. I've been telling myself that for years. They became unlikely friends. They still argued every time they saw each other. Neither ever won. Neither ever stopped trying. Odessa turned 1 the following summer. We celebrated in the backyard. Hamburgers, potato salad, a grocery store cake leaning slightly from the heat. My father wore a ball cap Odessa kept trying to steal. Branwen crossed the patio carefully with her cane while Odessa held 2 of her fingers, taking uncertain little steps. Crowley showed up 20 minutes late with a toy almost bigger than Odessa herself. I thought she'd like this. Thank you. I handed it back. Can you feed her lunch first? Sure. He fumbled with the tiny spoon. Odessa smeared mashed banana across her face, then across his shirt. He looked at me, silently asking for help. A year earlier I'd have stepped in without thinking. This time I just smiled. You've got it. He cleaned her face, changed her shirt, wiped down the high chair. Awkward. Slow. But he did it. Before he left, he paused beside me. Alistair and Tobin don't really call anymore. I figured. I guess they liked my money more than me. A few weeks later, Alistair mailed me a check covering part of the vacation costs, with a note. I should have stopped him. I'm sorry. I deposited it. Then I let the whole thing go, because by then I understood something I'd missed in those first terrible weeks. The greatest cost Crowley would ever pay wasn't the house, or the money, or even his name in San Antonio. It was knowing that every warm family moment he witnessed from then on would remind him of the 1 month he traded it all away for. As the sun went down on Odessa's birthday, my father complained someone had taken the last corner piece of cake. Branwen calmly admitted she had. You snooze, you lose. He pointed a finger at her. I knew I couldn't trust you. She laughed so hard she had to sit down. None of us were perfect. My father still walked carefully. Branwen still leaned on her cane. I still had days when the anxiety showed up uninvited. Healing hadn't erased any of our scars. It had just taught us how to carry them. I used to believe getting even meant making someone hurt the way they'd hurt you. I know better now. The real win is building a life where they no longer get to decide whether you feel safe, or respected, or at peace. If you've ever had to close the door on someone you once loved, I hope you remember this. Protecting your peace isn't selfish. Sometimes it's the kindest thing you can do, for yourself, and for the people who actually stay.